I believe that the Premier is making very irresponsible allegations. The issue here is that we are calling on all leaders from civil society, from political organizations, to take a stand against violence, against vandalism, because to us it's unacceptable under any terms that in a democratic South Africa, where people are allowed to protest freely, that they must engage themselves in such disgusting activities.
Does the ANC take responsibility for these protests?
The ANC has got nothing to do with what happened. That's why we have condemned the violence. We understand the frustration that people are going through. Still, it does not justify the violence.
In fact, the ANC has blamed the EFF for the protests. How can you be sure of this?
There are many groups that were there, including people wearing berets of EFF in the forefront and other organizations that were there. But what we're clear about is that all those organizations are fighting for political space, and how they're introducing themselves in the political space we think is wrong, it's crude, it's the kind of politics, gutter politics we don't need in South Africa.
Speaking of those kinds of politics, by blaming the EFF, are you not using them as a convenient scapegoat?
We're not blaming EFF per se, but we're saying EFF is part of the groups that are introducing gutter politics in the South African scene.
Now, what will the ANC's next step be? How will you respond to these accusations that have been made by the DA?
From where we sit, the important thing is that we've got to stand up as a society, as South Africans, and communicate a common message that says there is no space in South Africa for violent protest. I think those activities that they are engaged in are activities that could have been justified pre-1994. 20 years into democracy, there is no explanation why people will conduct themselves in that particular way. I mean, unfortunately, it's the same group that we saw during the POO protest. And clearly they are continuing with those tendencies, despite the fact that they have been overwhelmingly condemned.
Well, you mentioned those POO protests, and it is an understandable expression of deep frustration. A lot of these people's grievances, these legitimate grievances, they get lost in the middle of this political mudslinging, with the DA pointing fingers at the ANC pointing fingers at the EFF. What do you say to that? These people, they're being forgotten in the middle of all of this.
Well, the reality of the situation is that you've got hooligans who have seen an opportunity that out of the dire conditions that our people find themselves in, unfortunately, because the DA has failed to address the problems of the poorest of the poor, they have then become vulnerable to any group that promises them a solution. And as a result, we are then faced with all these sorts of problems. To us, it seems like this is a deliberate destabilization strategy, and we are calling on law enforcement agencies that they must act harshly against any individual or leaders who are involved in such activities.
Now, there are also claims from the DA that this protest was organized by ANC councillor Loyiso Nkohla. Is this indeed the case?
Loyiso Nkohla and Andile Lili are suspended members of the ANC who are facing the disciplinary committee of the ANC. And at this point, it's difficult to do anything until those processes are concluded.
News that moves. eNCA.com.